Welcome to the Femsplainers. I'm Danielle Crittenden, and I have another friend this week dropping by for a glass of wine up the top. Before we get to the serious stuff, it's Meghan Cox Gurdon, beloved co-splainer and children's book critic for the Wall Street Journal. She reads a lot of picture books.
I do. Yeah. Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm glad to be back. I was welcoming them back. Actually, welcome to our cocktail party.
Yeah, no, this is our little cocktail party à deux. So we're all coming out of this COVID, or so we hope, and you have not gotten a vaccine. Like, you are so like, oh my God, I've had my first vaccine, and you don't even have your first vaccine.
Everyone around me, even my children, my husband, everyone has a vaccine. I'm just too feckless, honestly. I've signed up a few times online, and I'm essentially just biding my time, going for long walks every day in that COVID way that one does, waiting for it to become convenient to just pop down the road and get it. I mean, my husband, Christina, all kinds of people drive to these vast and very impressive facilities.
One of our other co-splainers, Christina Summers, went to Six Flags.
That's where my husband went. Yeah, Six Flags.
You get like in the roller coaster, they just jab as you go by.
Yeah, no, it's very, very, very dramatic and effective and wonderful. But I'm as I say, I'm lazier and more feckless than that.
No, you're actually actually you revealed to me why you don't have it. You're so obedient that you signed up through your Maryland government.
Yeah, this is true.
And then you waited passively to be notified.
Patiently and obediently. That's right.
And then I was like, Meghan, you got to work these sites. You got to.
Periodically, I get a friendly email in which the state of Maryland tells me that they know that I'm on their list, and soon my appointment will come.
You're like a Canadian, it's like, I'm not going to jump the queue when you tell me.
Well, there is that. I guess there is an element of that. I mean, I'm pretty disobedient otherwise. I like to walk around and breathe the fresh air without any kind of interference.
Oh no, you're one of those people who in the wide open parkland won't wear a mask.
That's correct. I absolutely, I sometimes will pass people on these long walks that I take listening to audiobooks, which is what I love to do. And someone will be 100 yards away and I'll see them they see me without my mask on, and they'll pull to one side like, oh, this woman is irresponsible and she's dangerous. And I think, lady, I couldn't hit you with a flamethrower. Okay. I am not a threat to you. The wind is blowing. Everything's fine. Anyway, that's me. No, I
know. It's funny. You have this, I don't think of you as a rebellious person. And so we have a dog park across from our house, like in a ravine that we walk in every day. And at the beginning of the pandemic, people would move out of the way on the path because the path gets quite narrow.
Yeah.
And then so you'd sort of climb up into the hillside and everybody 6 feet distanced as they pass each other. And it was very polite. Now everybody wears a mask since last summer. And if you don't have to wear it while you're walking, but you elaborately, it's like some Victorian ritual of tipping hats or curtsying, that when you see someone coming from a distance, you put on the mask. And all of it's theater. It's theater. Yeah. But on the other hand, it's a way, as the tip of the hat or the curtsy, I'm a gentleman. I'm a proper lady. I'm not an asshole. Okay. I'm not one of those anti-maskers.
Unfortunately,
so you are conveying to people like, I'm an asshole. I don't believe in this COVID. It's just the flu.
No, I like your analogy of the Victorian kind of delicacies. That actually is a sort of an ennobled way of looking at it.
Yeah.
To me, it has far more of the whiff of the evil eye. There's something kind of primitive and atavistic about making a gesture to ward off the evil spirits when it's not real. If people are, I don't know, I don't want to come across as a crazy here, but if people are really worried, they don't lift and lower. But I guess, I take your interpretation.
No, and,
you wouldn't want to touch
that's all it is. It's pure. It's like putting a napkin in your lap or something. It's just an indicator because and I think maybe it was more intense in the last year of the Trump administration where unfortunately, I think it was the reaction to the mask being politicized. And once the mask got politicized, then you wanted to say, I'm not those people.
Right.
Like I'm not an asshole. That was basically what it was. And then now it's just continued, and it's silly. But I thought we should all, I had a business plan that I wanted to get masks or pins that said, I am vaccinated.
I think that's a great idea.
And then you could,
don't worry.
Don't worry. Just blast it. Maybe a friend of mine actually has baseball caps that have V's on them, but I think people won't know what that is. That's like victory. What is it?
Right.
But you want like some sort of, although of course,
some kind of star that you stitch on your sleeve.
Star. David said the anti-vaxxers actually have compared getting the vaccination to the Holocaust. Like this is a mass.
That's a little linguistic excess there.
Right. Well, no, because in fact, look at it the other way, that if you think getting the vaccine is a direct line into your arm from Bill Gates, global elite domination, just FYI, after the first shot, your Wi-Fi does not improve. I'm waiting until I can just Google things in my brain to outsmart
so
David. Hey, David, just wait a second. Got it. But if you think of it that way, and then you look at these mass stadiums, as you were describing, Six Flags or whatever, people getting jabbed, and you think, oh, this is the evil state rounding up people and jabbing them. So David and I were discussing this, and he said, we should revive and give good associations to the yellow star. Just bring it back, but in a positive way. Rebrand it, really.
Yeah, I do remember those early days. Again, of remembering these interminable walks that I have been taking over the last year. But the early days when it was, in fact, being widely discouraged to wear masks, everywhere. I mean, all over the world, because people wanted to, of course, retain them for the healthcare workers.
Right. They were a shortage, right?
So we were, and we were everybody was out walking. Not everybody, obviously, but many people were out walking. You saw lots more people. And there was that lovely spirit of, the Blitz. We're all in this together, and you'd, make a rueful face at the person passing you, and they'd make their rueful face to you. And occasionally I remember one particular incident when a woman passed me and she was beautifully dressed. And I said, excuse me, but you look wonderful. And she said, I just couldn't wear leggings another day.
Well, what's going to be, we've talked about this a little bit before, but what is the thing that you're going to do when you're fully vaccinated? I know I'm going to eat inside at a restaurant.
Yeah, I've actually done that.
Oh yeah, but you're the it's all a hoax.
I don't.
Person.
No, I'm not. No,
just drink Sandy Flush and you're fine.
No,
Mr. Clean.
I mean, honestly, the darkest days of the 1970s when people would go to orgies and mosh pits and key parties and things like that. That sounds pretty good to me right now.
You want to do a key party?
No, and if my husband is listening, absolutely, I would not consider it. But the idea of just being, in a mosh of other people, with like people shouting at each other's faces and thumping music, just would have been a nightmare to me earlier. And now I just think I would love that.
Yeah.
So that's what I want to do. I want to be in crowds again. And I used to detest crowds, but you only miss the water when the well dries up, I suppose.
Right. You just to be now a little serious, because we are, making a very serious podcast these days. You had about a month ago a really interesting article in Persuasion, which we have mentioned many times on this podcast.
Yeah, wonderful site. Everyone should join Persuasion. They are really great. It's really,
Let's be persuasive about people joining Persuasion. It's like a center. It's
sensible. It's
run by Yasha Monk.
Yeah,
and it's Persuasion community or something.
But Persuasion community, and then the Twitter handle is Join Persuasion.
Join Persuasion,
which is a nice way of incorporating.
But they do a lot of good stuff, and a lot of the guests who have been on our show have written things for that. And you wrote an interesting article about just how, and this goes of course to your reporting for the Wall Street Journal on picture books and beyond. You do young adults too.
I do know.
But about how classics are the subterranean subterfuge, whatever, attack on classics in school curriculums.
Yeah. There's it's an interesting movement in some respects.
Subversion.
It's an organization, sort of a hashtag affiliation called Disrupt Texts. And it's run by a group of women who they style themselves as anti-racist educators, and they are acting as mentors and leaders to young teachers who are, let's say, of the wokish persuasion. And there's a sort of push to get certain classic books out of American classrooms in order to make way for more young adult literature and more sort of modish kind of contemporary type work. And there's a lot to this. We've had, really, I remember the canon battles of the 90s. When I got,
right. It's
plus ça change. Right. Plus ça change. Exactly.
It keeps coming back.
I think one of the things that what we have now is a kind of hyper version of what we had in the 90s, which is writers and their work being judged not necessarily from its aesthetic or artistic quality, but on the color of the skin of the author, or the sex of the author, or the gender of the author, or whatnot. And then that's now met with this kind of great wave of wokeism that we're having. And there's it's hard to present it all in one coherent way because there's so many pieces to this. But some of it, really comes from a good place. But we have to stipulate that, canons are always changing. What everybody is reading, for 100 years won't be the same from one century to another. So certain works, sustain themselves because they are sufficiently good and sufficiently loved that they get carried over, and then some get kind of dropped over time, and that's reasonable. But but what is some of what's happening now is there's this idea, which in itself is not a dreadful one, that children need to see themselves in literature. Now, I would argue that is actually what all literature does. It shows us ourselves in the sense that we are human beings. It shows us the aspects of our nature, the aspects of the nature of others that we see around us. Any very beautifully written book will have that certain quality of, human truth.
Right. I remember David, one of his most profoundly influential books, and this is so David, was reading the Captain Hornblower series. Like, he's obviously not a British, naval officer of the 18th century, whenever it was written. Sorry, David, I didn't read the Hornblower series, but to him, it was like a model of not just courage, but overcoming fears. And this is like all great literature, whether
right, there's a universal quality.
You identify with stories of people overcoming things, of perseverance.
Absolutely. But there's again this idea of, so that's the
or even just a movie, like going into worlds that are actually, the joy is they're not like you. You're seeing something so completely different.
Right. Or you recognize little parts of yourself, even in the villains and in the heroes or whatever, and you get a more complex experience of your own humanity through literature. Right. That's the maybe we call it the traditional way of understanding it, but there's this very narrow way of understanding it now. That is that children need to see themselves according to their, identity, their social identity. So children of very dark skin must be able to read books starring children with very dark skin. Children with light brown skin should find themselves in books. Children with white skin should find themselves in books, et cetera, and divvied down into, kind of racial, ethnic, and sex categories or gender categories, whatever. And all of that's fine, but it's also horribly limiting in a way as well. The idea that children should see people like them is very strictly understood. And it means that books that don't carry these embodiments or these characterizations are found to be wanting, that they're not good enough, that the assertion is even made that these books are damaging to children. Let's say, I don't know, a child, an African-American child is meant to be given a picture of the world that erases that child. It's a very limited, it's a very sort of, it's an unintellectual way of looking at it.
It's getting into this. And I think you had an example in your story where an author, because she was writing about somebody who was not exactly like, she created a character that was not exactly like her. Her agent, tell that story.
That's a slightly different story.
Yeah,
this isn't. So the story you're thinking of is an author, a young adult writer called Jessica Cluess, and she was responding with exasperation on Twitter to some of the assertions made by these disrupt texts people. One of the women involved in this movement in particular, and she just kind of lost it. I think she had one of those really. So the original, the tweet by this woman, Lorena German, who I hope I'm not mispronouncing her name, it called on people to remark that that the world was very different before, the American society was very different before 1950. And that's what's in these classic books. And that's why we have to disrupt them. Mm-hmm. In other words, that if you're teaching books written before 1950, particularly from American literature, you're somehow perpetuating, the crimes of the past in today's modern classroom. It's a very blinkered way of looking at literature. And so Jessica Cluess flipped out and sent off but I don't have them to hand, but they're really very funny and worth reading. If you think that, Nathaniel Hawthorne was on the side of the Puritans in the Scarlet Letter, which he clearly isn't, he's clearly not presenting the Puritan ethic as something to aspire to, then you should sit on a tack and spin or something. I think she's an Italian American. She's got some colorful language, but this blew up because, one writer, a white writer writing sarcastically to a brown educator is not allowed. And so Jessica Cluess, I forgive the inarticulate way I'm telling this story, but so Jessica Cluess's own agent, a guy called Brooks Sherman, publicly repudiated her.
That sounds like a very waspy F. Scott Fitzgerald era character.
Oh,
I say Brooks. Shall we meet you at the club?
Yes. Well, and Brooks Sherman famously at the time was the agent who had either discovered or had been made rich by, depending on who you talk to, the very popular young adult writer Angie Thomas.
Yeah.
So he had this, big high profile. He repudiates Jessica Cluess and will no longer represent her. Well,
I say you went too far, Jessica.
Yes. Interestingly, he himself has now been defenestrated in the way of these things. That he who plays with a Twitter sword sometimes dies by the Twitter sword. And he's had to be.
What happened? Why did he? Is he like I'm suggesting?
There was a, how do I put it? Kind of a whisper campaign in that world. People found fault with him. People felt that he had harmed them. Some of the writers thought that he was. That he wasn't giving them truthful responses. He was maybe spending more of his time on his famous clients and less time on others.
Oh, this is wonderful. This is like now we all can have grievances with our agents when they don't call back quickly enough.
Right.
Which they famously don't do. And they famously pay more attention to their
famous clients, which is really strange when you come to think of it. Yeah. So that in long and winding ways.
My rejection was a microaggression.
But this brings us to the concept of harm, which is actually also underlies this whole, disrupt the classic texts, drama. And that is the idea that we are harmed by things, it's really seeped into the culture in an extraordinary way. Right. And I mean, women of our generation, we don't walk around saying we've been harmed, but women of a generation or two younger than us, boy, there's a lot of harm happening.
Well, Christina and I talked about this last week with the journalists who are now being harmed by the stories they cover. Yes. And then our guest, Julie Lythcott-Hames, has written a book for young Gen Zers and millennials, like how to be an adult and things like coping with rejection and things not going always the way you expect them to go. So it was interesting. But you think, just final question, do you think is this got a real movement? I mean, do you think it's going to have real effect, or is it just something more on Twitter, or just some of these activists who, like in the 90s, tried to cancel Shakespeare and weren't able to do it in the end?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I would say I think that unfortunately it's though the number of activists is relatively small, their reach is extensive, and you do have, coming out of the schools of education, you have a very woke cohort of teachers. And they're really responsive, and they feel that they're doing something really good. If you can protect people from having to read Moby Dick, and you give them, Angie Thomas's book, The Hate You Give, instead, people imagine that they're really doing kids a favor by
Right.
by that. I mean, and it is true that Moby Dick is a demanding book. It's also funny and brilliant and very multi-layered. And
I read Moby Dick because actually that was David's favorite book. And when we were recording, I read it. Christopher Hitchens, I once was explaining to him why I didn't like a certain book. And I don't think it was Moby Dick, but it was like, he goes, yeah, bit of a chap thing. Oh. And I felt like there is a lot of fish and men with sperm. And it was like,
oh, but it's so funny.
I know there was great moments, and I did get through it, but I have to admit my sympathies with the students.
Yes, I know, but I mean, I guess there's a whole great pedagogical discussion to be had about is high art and demanding culture. Right. Is it it's worth tackling just to give it a go to see what the scope is, and of course you read.
But I would be happily read other challenging things.
Yeah. I think about that Hitchens line about it's a chap thing kind of often, because I sometimes wonder if maybe I'm a bit of a chap reader myself. Yeah. I'm listening right now on Audible to The Count of Monte Cristo, and it's so unbelievably exciting, and it's an absolute boy's adventure story. I mean, a fantastic revenge story, and I mean, it's thrillingly done. And so yeah, maybe I'm a bit of a chap, really.
You're a bit of you have an inner chap. I've discovered an inner rebel, an inner anti-masker.
No, I'm not an anti-masker. Okay, let the record show.
Yeah. Endangering the parkland. Well, thank you, Meghan. Thanks for joining me for this glass of wine. I'll pour you a little more before you leave.
Thank you.
And then I just want to let our listeners know that our upcoming guest, she's just a fantastically interesting woman. Her name is Sarah Longwell. She's a Republican political strategist and publisher, one of the founders of the conservative news and opinion website, The Bulwark. She also is the founder of Republican Voters Against Trump, which is now called the Republican Accountability Project. But before you think, you political listeners, that I'm just bringing on, we thought, okay, this era of partisan politics, we're putting it behind us. We're not talking about politics anymore. Sarah is a longtime conservative from Trump country. She was raised in rural Pennsylvania, and she discovered she was a lesbian, as she'll tell us, when she was in her mid-20s. She became the first female national board chair of the Log Cabin Republicans, but she has been doing fascinating work about the sort of Trump phenomena, the cultural phenomena. She's done focus groups for 3 years looking into where it came from, why especially women found Trump and this kind of politics fascinating, and what is going to happen to the GOP going forward. So it's more like I think she's more like an anthropologist of republicanism than anything else, and she herself is just fascinating. So I hope you enjoy it. And Meghan, thank you again so much for stopping by. It's so much fun to have you.
It's really fun to be back,
and we'll bring you back soon. And just a reminder that if you are enjoying these conversations, enjoy the podcast, please consider becoming a subscriber at patreon.com/femsplainers. That's Patreon, patreon.com/femsplainers, with whatever you could afford a month, a cup of coffee, price of a cocktail maybe. And in addition to helping keep us going, because we do depend on your donations to keep the podcast alive, you will get benefits. You can listen to the podcast early and ad-free. We have our monthly subscribers only podcast called Last Call, where you get to ask our guests over the month the questions. And you get our newsletter, but you also join our community and even hang out with us once a month for our cocktail parties. So again, it's patreon.com/femsplainers. Anything you can contribute is greatly appreciated. Now we'll go to our sponsor. So there's a joke going around this pandemic that we're all going to emerge from it in one of 3 categories: drunks, hunks, or chunks. And if you're trying to avoid the chunks category, then I have a cereal for you, and one that won't even make it feel like you're dieting. And it's called Magic Spoon. Magic Spoon has 0 grams of sugar, 13 to 14 grams of protein, and only 4 net grams of carbs in each serving, and only 140 calories a serving. And yet it's like one of the cereals you had when you were a kid. And yet it's keto friendly, gluten-free, grain-free, soy-free, low carb, and GMO-free. And we've got exciting news. Magic Spoon is relaunching the blueberry flavor. One of your favorite flavors is now back in stock after being sold out. Or you can build your own box. Available flavors to build your own custom bundle are cocoa, fruity, frosted, peanut butter, and cinnamon. And if you're listening from Canada, hey, Canadian listeners, Magic Spoon now ships there as well, and it's a good deal. So go to magicspoon.com/femsplainers to grab some blueberry or a custom bundle of cereal to try today. And be sure to use our promo code FEMSPLAINERS at checkout to save $5 off your order. This offer is now good anywhere in the US or Canada, but only when you use our code at checkout. And Magic Spoon is so confident in their product, it's backed with a 100% happiness guarantee. So if you don't like it for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. So remember, get your next delicious bowl of guilt-free cereal at magicspoon.com/femsplainers and use the code FEMSPLAINERS to save $5 off. And in Canadian, that is magicspoon.com/femsplainers and use the code FEMSPLAINERS to save a big 5 loonies off your next order. Thank you, Magic Spoon, for sponsoring this episode. Sarah, welcome to the Femsplainers.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Well, I'm so excited to have you. We met for the first time. I've lost all sense of time in COVID, but maybe last fall or something. You'd known my husband David, and then we met at a mutual friend's house. And I remember leaving that dinner and thinking, that was the most interesting person I've heard speaking about politics. You were so fascinating and insightful. And I just thought, okay, I need to hear more from you because
you're kidding, man. No. That's amazing. Thanks for saying that. I don't know. What was I even talking about? I was probably drinking.
Yeah. Well, okay. Dirty jokes, really. No.
Yeah, that's right.
No, but yeah, the work that you do, and I want to introduce our listeners to it because it's very important, but it's very detailed. You do so many focus groups, but I want to start by getting background from you that you were born in rural, what we would call now Trump country. Is that right? You grew up.
Yeah, well, I was born in Lima, Ohio, where my parents were in law school at Ohio Northern. And then we moved first to Hershey, but then for most of my formative years to central Pennsylvania, to a very small town, about 800 people. Kind of a farming-ish area where my parents kind of had a law firm on the center of town. There was a 2-aisle grocery store, one other business, and then theirs. And the town was very, I loved growing up there. It was the best. You know, we played in the woods all the time. And I remember going to the bank and trying to take out money with my bank book at one point, and the person who was the bank teller just grabbing her purse and being like, "You're not going to take out $2 from your bank account. Like, here's $2." Because, you know, she knew my parents, knew who I was.
Tell your mom to pay me back whenever.
Yeah, that's exactly. Yeah. So it was definitely, and it definitely is now very much Trump country, but that is, yeah, I grew up in central Pennsylvania and loved it.
And you were, and I think are, consider yourself conservative.
Yeah. I mean, I think some of it probably came from the fact that I grew up in kind of a small town, and then went in my high school years, I got bused to a private school in the city. And there was this real clash of cultures that took place there that all the teachers had PhDs and it was a much more liberal environment. And I loved it. And it was a hugely important part of my life that I was able to sort of go get this education. And there was like 8 of us from this county we would meet at the local police barracks and the van would take us to the school. But it was also just, I guess I felt, sometimes kids there would be like, do people wear shoes where you live? Like I was sort of a country bumpkin and the school was really diverse. It was the first time I was in a situation that was really racially diverse, economically very diverse. There were like really rich kids and then people who were from the inner city. And it was hugely formative, but it also it caused me to maybe like entrench a little bit where I felt like I was fighting with what were pretty liberal teachers and professors, and a lot of what they said for whatever reason just didn't fit with how I felt, politics in the world should go. And of course I'm like 15, so nobody should ever have been listening to me, but I did have strong opinions at 15, and my parents, who were pretty politically engaged, started giving me political books to read so that I could, be sharper in my arguments. And it was, one of these schools where it was a lot of Socratic methods. So like you could just argue with the teacher. And I loved to argue with my teachers. But I do think both in high school and then in college, being in a more progressive environment, for whatever reason, whether I'm a born contrarian or what have you, I sort of became increasingly interested in not just sort of being a Republican politically, but in conservatism as sort of an intellectual proposition. And it became something that I actively pursued and was interested in, in my like early 20s, late teens.
This would have been in the early 90s, correct? Like when you were in high school, coming of age. Yeah, under Bill Clinton, I guess, was the president that you came of age under, as it were. That's
right. And actually, I think that had a lot to do with it. So I graduated high school in 98, college in 02. And so 9/11 happened toward the end of my college experience. And then Bill Clinton was getting impeached toward the end of my high school experience. And so I certainly was looking at what was going on in politics. And, Monica Lewinsky was just a few years older than I was. And I thought, man, what a dirtbag this guy is. And just because of the way that the politics were at the time, it was the Democrats who were defending, and feminists who were defending what I thought was really gross behavior. And it was the Republicans who were talking about character and decency. And these were things that really resonated with me. This idea that character counted, that it was important to be a good person, a decent person, to have sort of a sense of objective truth around what is right and what is wrong. And that you wasn't just okay to go lying about your sexual escapades in the White House under oath. And, and I'm, whenever you're 18 and you're, pretty righteous about things, that made a big difference. And when I was listening to Republicans, they were the ones at the time. It's so funny, actually, in retrospect, but I loved watching all of the impeachment hearings. I was politically interested, and the Republicans they would get up there and they would make these really, impassioned speeches. Mitch McConnell did it about the importance of character and how you cannot have a politics. Lindsey Graham was one of the people who was constantly talking about you just could not have politics with people who told lies, without truth. What did we have? I mean, and I was like, yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. And that was, for me, I'm older than you are, but that was sort of in my early female punditry days. And I remember one of the reasons I didn't agree or connect with the feminist movement of the time, and then it was like the National Organization of Women, is because up until that point with Bill Clinton, they had made what we're seeing more of today that we now call woke, but there it was, men at water coolers making a stray sexual joke or remark and being fired. I mean, that was the sort of beginning of we won't tolerate this behavior towards women. And then when the president behaved so grossly with an employee in the White House and, as you say, lied about it under oath, and we saw Gloria Steinem race to his defense, it just seemed to me so hypocritical. And I agree with you about watching the politics of the time and watching the Republicans of the time. And I very much thought of myself as a Republican. But so how things change.
How things change.
So you see that. You also, at what point did you come out as a lesbian? Because that, I would assume, maybe in your small town background could have been awkward. What was that like?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think it's less to do with the small town and just like where we were on the issue. So if you think that the first state passed gay marriage in 2005, I'm 25 at that point. So I've done sort of high school and college in an environment where LGBT issues are actually kind of at the forefront of the culture wars. And so most of the people that I was reading at the time who I really enjoyed on a lot of issues were the ones who weren't with me on let's say gay issues. And I think that there was no doubt that people come out much younger. Like there was like this wave of people like 3 years after me, and they were all coming out in college, but nobody was who was my age. Like it was the kind of thing you did later because it was still something that was pretty new, and it was a flash, sort of a cultural flashpoint. And one of the things that was weird for me was I got out of college. I went to work at a conservative think tank, the Intercollegiate Studies Institute, that I was really interested in campus politics. They do a lot of that work. And, I was at that age where campus politics was really the only politics I knew. So I went to work at this think tank in Delaware, and they had a publishing imprint. And they were, when I was a couple years in, they were publishing Rick Santorum's book. And we're talking right now, 2005, the most anti-gay, outspoken legislator out there. Christine O'Donnell, who you may remember, who was not a witch. She was the Tea Party candidate in Delaware in maybe 2010, an early Tea Party wave person who unseated Mike Castle, who was the moderate in Delaware. Back then, she was the communications director, and she ended up, there was something that was weird. She leaves, and they're looking immediately for a new communications director, and I got the job, which was very exciting for me at 25. But it also meant that my first job was to go on the road with Rick Santorum and promote his book, It Takes a Family, which was all about why gay marriage was a bad idea for our culture. Yeah. And it was, I was like standing off in the wings when he like went on the Daily Show with Jon Stewart and had a big argument about it. And, there were always gay protesters at the events. And for me, I was so worried about doing a good job and sort of being a good employee that I wasn't thinking as much about the fact that this was the period where I was kind of saying, yeah, I'm pretty sure this is what's going on with me.
So you were 25, like this was, you didn't sort of realize this earlier, like when you were in college or high school?
Realized is not in high school, definitely not. Actually, it was just I didn't know anybody who was gay. Yeah. Like it's just not like it is now. It's hard to look back and remember, but for me, I didn't know anybody. Turns out, actually, I knew a lot of people, but at the time, people weren't out, and we were just on the cusp of when people started to come out a lot more easily, and so. And I wanted to work in this conservative world. That's what I was interested in intellectually. In politics, I was really passionate about politics. But it was conflicting. And ultimately, what happened was while I was there, while I was working on the book, Rick Santorum's communications director in his office got outed. There was a group that went around outing gay Republicans at the time, and his communications director, they actually did like an episode. HBO did an episode about this. That horrible Aaron Sorkin show, Newsroom.
Oh yeah,
they did this episode about when Santorum's communications director in his office got outed. But I remember that thinking, they're coming for me, and like just like sweating through my clothes. And like, you didn't have phones in your pockets back then, but like I remember when the story broke, it was a big story that this person was gay, and like Rick Santorum went on TV and sort of defended their relationship, as did this guy. And it was just such a weird, scary time. But I did sort of toward the end of college was when I kind of had my first girlfriend and was like, oh, I think this is what's going on. But then I kind of, I was working in this conservative world, living in Delaware, which wasn't like the, social epicenter of anything. Right. And so anyway, so it took some time, but the Santorum thing was when everything kind of broke for me because it was too hard. It was too hard. And I was at an event one time and there was a book event and for him, and I have a picture of us together from this day. But there were two women there with their teenage daughter. And she was holding, preteen, she's probably 13. Yeah. She was holding a sign that said, "My two moms take me bowling." And for whatever reason, I was like, yep, that's my limit. I've hit it. I'm out. I'm done. And I quit and moved to DC and, started asking friends, hey, how do you get a job where you don't have to do all this socially conservative stuff? Cause I hate it, and it took me time to understand the politics of the real world. And those 3 years in Delaware were pretty formative in realizing that okay, this is how what conservatism is in the real world. It's a lot of these evangelical groups. It's a lot of this social issues. And that was really dominant at the time. And I was like, and this isn't for me. I don't want to do this. In fact, I made a promise to myself that when I got to DC, I was going to start figuring out how I could advance. I promised myself I was going to be out in that moment. And I also promised myself I was going to do something to help advance kind of the gay rights issues at the time, which were don't ask, don't tell repeal and gay marriage. And so I ended up joining log cabin Republicans. So it was me and a bunch of 70-year-old gay men, and eventually became the first female national board chair. But I did a lot of work there that I sort of felt helped me work off my years with Rick Santorum. Cosmically,
like the sort of exorcism of the path. So when you described yourself then as a conservative, these were largely on economic issues, some of the cultural issues, I guess, Bill Clinton shouldn't be having sex with his interns would be more of although that was a legal issue as well, obviously, of lying under oath. What were some of the issues that you were most passionate about at the time?
Yeah, here's the thing. So I still a big fan of freedom, love freedom, want individual. I think I want human beings to sort of thrive and be able to make their choices about what they care about for themselves. I find the constant sort of knee-jerk reaction to more government and more government control or intrusion in our lives, even on the LGBT issues. There's a period of time where I kind of was a libertarian for a hot minute because I was actually what I really care about is just, I think people should be free to do what they want and, no government or whatever. I've sort of kind of grown out of that phase as one does oftentimes. But yeah, for me, it was always with the really basic stuff. It was I don't think you should run up huge debts and deficits because any just the kitchen table common sense person inside of me feels like that's unsustainable. At some point, someone's going to have to pay that bill. Look, I believe that American liberal democracy is the great hope of the world, and I think that we should show moral leadership in the world. I think we've traded away a lot of that, but I think part of what brought me to conservatism, especially in the sort of years between, the early aughts, was the idea that America had a role to play in the world. And so, again, with sort of, I don't want to frame what I was for by what I was against, but I was against the notion that raising taxes and more government were the solutions to all problems. I thought at the time, sort of this staggering hypocrisy from the left. I felt at the time that the left really had a lot of purity tests, right? And that they expected people to kind of march in ideological lockstep. And if you didn't, and especially coming out of a liberal college, like I did, I think there's sometimes that can help radicalize people when you see sort of the politics on a college campus and they're like, well, if you don't believe this, you're either racist or you're sexist or you're immoral or some way. And you think, okay, but I think that this is a perfectly sensible position to have. And I don't think that it's sexist to believe X, Y, or Z. And I also don't think that you're actually engaging in a debate when you're just calling names. Like I had some of those kind of reactions to what I was seeing from the left. And so I felt like the Republican Party at the time described itself much more as a big tent, and you could be kind of a libertarian, and you could be an economic conservative, or you could be a social conservative, and you could all kind of exist under the same tent, and everybody did so, with a kind of tolerance for each other.
Right.
And so I think that was a lot of it. I also when I came to DC and started working, I started doing a lot of business issues. I've always admired job creators. I've always admired business as a thing that America excels at. I like love people who innovate and are really passionate about figuring out how to grow their business. I could talk to entrepreneurs just all day long. And I think that was something where the sort of more the mindset that I attributed to liberals of constantly looking to put kind of blockades on that innovation by saying, well, you can't do this, or you can't do this, or you got to pay this level of taxes that's going to sort of cripple your ability to grow. Those were the kinds of things that I kind of went to bat against from a policy standpoint, because I did spend, 15 years in the sort of conservative, pro-free market policy space.
Yeah, you worked for Richard Berman. I'll just briefly touch on this because I want to fast forward to the work you've been doing more recently. But Richard, just describe who Richard Berman was. He's kind of legendary in DC.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people think that the movie, like Thank You for Smoking, is based on him. I think it's technically not, but there's a reason why it is. Like, this is a guy who did a lot of work for the alcohol industry, something I have a random expertise in a lot of alcohol related policy issues because of my work there. Did a lot of work for the restaurant industry. And he's kind of known as like a bare knuckle brawler, communications guy, lobbyist for business interests. And I spent
he has a sign that says Dr. Evil on his desk.
Dr. Evil, that's right.
Yeah.
60 Minutes did one of the early things that I did with him. 60 Minutes did a piece on him. Morley Safer did it. RIP. And it was a great piece. Morley Safer, who I think is like a chain smoker his entire life. And somebody who, like, when they passed all the smoking restrictions, we didn't do tobacco work, but when they passed the smoking restrictions, like, Morley Safer was just like, yeah, I don't care about that. I'm going to keep smoking in my office. And so he
was very old school. Morley Safer.
He was very old school.
Yeah.
And so he and Rick had like a bit of a kinship, I think, in that. And I loved working there. I loved working for Rick. I thought I was going to run that company. That's what I thought I was doing with my life. But I also wasn't the same as Rick. Like Rick, he was old school and we didn't always have the same opinions about politics. And I think my politics were evolving even while I was there, as the world changed. But it was a great place to learn how to stand your ground in the kind of policy arena. Right.
And you credit him with sort of teaching you how just to be blunt and forceful and stand up for your beliefs. And
yeah, 100%. I mean, imagine, he is old school in his way, but I'll just say this about, I don't talk about Rick that much, but he's absolutely a mentor. And he was also, so sometimes when you're a young woman, or I'm not even that young anymore, but like I'm short, right? I am of small stature, and Rick is enormous. He's like 6'3", and he's just like a big dude with like huge hands. And like people always thought I was like his secretary or his assistant when we were in rooms. And he had this way, and it was also like in a scrum of handshakes and things like that. Yeah. It was easy for me to get lost. And he did this thing where he would like physically like put his hand kind of on my back and then like position his body to always like push me forward, so that whenever this thing happened, he would be like, this is Sarah. And like immediately have this way of making sure that everybody like understood that I was like an important piece of whatever meeting was happening or whatever. Like he was somebody who really championed me, and my relationship with him is like one of the great, like, even though I went off to do my own thing, I did so with his blessing and encouragement. And yeah, I appreciate that relationship and his mentorship.
Well, with the work that you did with him, you did a lot of focus groups, which I always find, I think in another life, I would love to run focus groups. It's just, I think so anthropologically interesting, among other things. And you get to go out in the world and meet with all kinds of different people from all different backgrounds. And this then you brought to what is now this sort of later or new recent phase of your political career. One of the stories that impressed me is that you met Bill Kristol at a meeting right after Trump was elected. There was this group called the Meeting of the Concerned. I went to a couple of those meetings, and I think you described it as a lot of people, like Republicans or former now maybe Republicans, who were very upset about the election of Trump, and there was a lot of hand wringing. And you were just like, you walk in like you're action woman, like. When you decide to do something, you just get in. It's like, okay, this is fine. The hand wringing. What are we going to do about it? And then you and Bill Kristol sort of started having coffee together, and you formed an organization that pretty much devoted itself to defeating Trump or trying to defeat the Trump wing of the GOP. Is that fair? And why did you do this?
Yeah, I do think that spending a lot of time doing LGBT work within the Republican Party taught me a few things about how you just get used to everybody hating you or being mad at you. Right? Like Republicans don't like you because you're gay. Gay people don't like you because you're a Republican. And at some point, you got to figure out how to be like, all right, well, here's where I stand, and I accept your hate mail. And so when Trump was elected, and I had done all kinds of work to try to keep that from happening. But when I wasn't super involved the way other people were, but I was kind of trying to do my bit where I was. I started kind of going to these meetings. I was like, where are the people who are going to do something about Trump? Where are the Republicans who want to fight Trump? And I ended up going to the Meeting of the Concerned, and I'd gone a couple times, and it was like a little bit of it's just a room of sad Republicans kind of being like, what are we going to do? And, what's going on? It was a lot of analysis, right? Like, because people do this, everyone's still trying to get their feet under them and say, well, what is even going on here? And at some point, but in the rooms were people like Bill Kristol and Linda Chavez and Mona Sharon and, people like you, people like David, who were, people that I read and admired. And I was excited and heartened. Even though they were like in basements places, I was heartened to know that these people were there looking for something to do. And I do think that for me, after a couple of them, I was like, okay, well, this is an urgent situation. And I think we need to start doing something. And I kind of cornered Bill Kristol after one of these meetings. And I was like, hi, I'm Sarah. I run Berman and Company, which was a little bit of me gilding the lily because Rick's definitely still running it, but I wanted him to take me seriously. And he was kind of like, well, then what's Rick Berman doing? And I was like, he's still there, but I'm a serious person. I need to we should do something. And I began kind of pushing on him. And he was like, well, okay, let's have coffee. And that turned into a lot of coffees and a lot of drinks while we kind of plotted what could we do. And I said, we could build an organization. We can start doing research. Like, let's do focus groups. Let's understand what's going on in the party. I want to understand what is happening because it feels like we don't. I just didn't think it was that useful to sit around and all talk to each other because clearly something was happening in the party. Something was changing that we had missed and were continuing to miss. And we needed to go figure it out if we were going to do anything remotely effective. And so some of the first things that Bill and I did together was, kind of go around and be like, can anybody want to give us some money to do some research and try to build something? And it turned out some people were willing to do that. And immediately we began to think about, could you primary Trump? Was there enough appetite in the party that if it was a one-on-one, one of my early theories was such a crowded field, it had fractured kind of the normal Republican vote, and Donald Trump had been able to kind of get through on a plurality in his burn it all down lane. But that if it was a one-on-one that, maybe he'd lose. And, it seems naive in retrospect, but at the time, he didn't feel like he'd captured the party. And certainly so many Republicans I knew were so upset that he had won. And, it felt like a fluke, an accident of history, and one that we could potentially, if we put enough things together, we could correct or fight. We launched Defending Democracy Together, which shortly after the Mueller investigation got started and Trump was sort of breastfeeding like he was going to fire Mueller, we launched Republicans for the Rule of Law, because there was a bunch of Republicans at the time. It doesn't even feel like it anymore, but the Louisiana senator, a bunch of people who went on to become serious Trumpers at the time were like, you cannot fire a special counsel. He absolutely gets to have his investigation. Like, Republicans felt sane, and it still felt like there was something to work with back then. And so we had Republicans for the Rule of Law. We were trying to do these focus groups to figure out, okay, could you primary Trump? What part of the party has gone kind of full Trump, and what part of the party just voted against Hillary Clinton? But could vote for somebody, a Larry Hogan or somebody else, if he were to be primaried. And that's why the focus groups, I had done them in my previous work, but never this intensely, because once I started, I couldn't stop. Like, I've done them nonstop now since 2018 or late 17, because I've been able to, things are changing. People have changed. Like that. Now the things that I could not see in 2016 are very clear to me. I can see why Trump happened. I can see what's going on with voters. And I've also watched people evolve just because I've done it consistently now for like 3.5 years.
So if you're like me and you are just embracing the new spring weather, you've been outside in your garden. I've been potting around. I've been replacing my planters. And you've probably have upgraded or are thinking about upgrading a few things around your garden after being stuck inside. It makes sense. Now is the time to turn your yard into a paradise with fastgrowingtrees.com. So skip the big box stores and head to fastgrowingtrees.com, the world's largest online nursery. No more waiting in lines, messy cars, and digging through a lackluster selection, which, can I just say, has been made worse by the supply lines with COVID. You just have to go to fastgrowingtrees.com and choose from thousands of variety of trees, shrubs, and plants expertly curated to thrive in your area and delivered to your door in 1 or 2 days. So whether you're looking for shade, privacy, fruit trees, or just added color for your yard, every plant is shipped with a well-developed root system, ready to explode with new growth and color. I love fast-growing trees. I don't have to think about it. I look at my yard, I see what I need, and they have the plant that I want and the filler that I need in my hedge. It's perfect. And there's a better way to buy trees and shrubs and plants for your home and yard, fastgrowingtrees.com. Planting season is here. Join over 1 million satisfied gardeners at fastgrowingtrees.com. Plus, the 30-day Alive and Thrive guarantee means your plants will arrive happy, healthy, and ready for planting. And now through June 30th, go to fastgrowingtrees.com/femsplainers for 15% off. That's 15% off at fastgrowingtrees.com/femsplainers. Embrace the growing season and make your yard look beautiful. Right. And I'm going to ask you about that, but I wanted to just why your perspective, your own personal perspective is so important is because a lot of the never Trumpers, which became the term that you and others, including my husband, became called, they were sort of, by Trump supporters, they were seen as these, condescending elites who hated Trump supporters and were baffled by who would support, this man Trump. And you came from a background where I'm sure you knew and grew up with a lot of people who eventually would become Trump supporters. And you went back to those places to do your focus groups. What were the things like, given that you came from that kind of background, What were the things that upset you about Trump? Like, what made you decide this guy can't be, my Republican? This guy can't be my president.
Yeah, again, it goes back to things that to me were very like the basics. This is not a person who is decent. Like the stuff that always, I'll tell you this, in terms of Trump, I never watched The Apprentice, which I didn't know I was going to have to be an active political observer. But so I just missed the whole Trump thing. I don't read Page Six. I only knew who he was in the sense that the way right now I know who the Kardashians are. Yes. I know that that's a thing. I know Kardashians are a thing. Maybe I could tell you one of them if I saw.
You can't tell Khloe or Kim apart, basically.
Definitely not. Definitely not. And so this was the thing with Trump is that I just didn't have much of a sense for him. But as soon as he sort of came on the scene, I agreed with the people who at the time said, this is not I'm not going to cover him. We're not going to cover him under politics. We're going to cover him under entertainment because this isn't a real thing. Right. And it took. So as a result, I just missed the whole thing. I was still way until the end, I was like, oh, Jeb Bush or Marco Rubio. I don't know. Chris Christie seems like he's maybe picking up some steam. I don't even know in retrospect, looking back what I was thinking before I realized oh, actually nobody wants Jeb Bush to be president. But I guess to the question of what it was about him, it was, the cruelty and the way that he talked. He lied all the time. But more importantly, obviously he had this sexual past where, he had lots of assault allegations, lots of cheating allegations, in his business, not paying people, mob ties, it was just all crazy. And to me, that core thing about conservatism, which was always sort of about common sense and being decent and kind of living a cultural and a good, I spent a lot of time talking about the good life and what it meant to live a good life. And some of that was be an honorable person, treat people how you want to be treated. I think it is extremely important. I still do, to have political leaders of non-toxic character. They don't have to be, religious figures. And I'm not particularly religious anyway, but I do think that they have to be decent and good and moral and try to reflect the best that America has to offer. And this guy was the worst. He embodied very specific things about our culture that I think are not healthy. And that is the obsession with, he was, terrible to women and reality television. And anyway, so he was unfit. So he was mean. He was toxic. He was clearly not fit to be the president of the United States he'd never done anything. He didn't have any experience, in anything government related other than stroking checks to any politician that he wanted to help him. He just represented the worst of America's id. And I thought it impossible that the good people of this country would elect somebody like him.
And then now you, as you said, you've obsessively gone and not just tried to figure it out, but you say you figured out what happened. Tell us a little bit about that. What did you find?
Yeah.
What was the reason that decent people decided to vote for Trump?
Yeah. So it's a couple things.
Including women too. Right.
For sure. And I spent a lot of time. I really did focus my attention in the later days, really on college educated suburban women, because I thought that's really where the swing votes were. But even before that, I talked to all kinds of groups, but sort of focused on women because I did think that was the group that was going to move the quickest. But here's the top lines of what was going on. So number one, it was in the beginning a protest vote for a lot of people. I heard in every group, and it's not even one person, but I cannot tell you, there are things when you do lots of focus groups, people are always like, yeah, but how much do you really get out of focus groups? Because are they maybe lying or, if you get a group where one person's dominant, doesn't it screw up the whole group? All of those things are sort of true. You are just dealing with kind of 8 or 10 people. But there are things that you hear over and over and over again that allow you to say, okay, this is a thing that was happening in the in the culture among people that they were saying to each other, because they all say it the same way or say the same things. And in every group, somebody would say, I did not vote for Donald Trump. I voted against Hillary Clinton. And that was just like such a prevailing sentiment, which is like they had lived with the Clinton corruption for decades. And this is a thing that I think the left never quite understood, but that was very apparent to, I think, people like us who had also disliked the Clintons, who had spent, a decade or more in a media ecosystem that thought the Clintons were uniquely corrupt and of bad character and represented sort of a really gross kind of politics that was entirely utilitarian where, and this was just Hillary Clinton's turn. I mean, people just hated Hillary Clinton. And it was funny because she had sort of grown on me. And I think maybe it was because just the contrast with Trump of, okay, well, here was a woman who she had gone through the paces. She had real jobs. She did have real experience. And while there were still the parts of me that, didn't like certain elements of her politics, I also thought, that she had, she'd kind of persevered from a pretty gross personal situation. And I think people blamed her in a way that they didn't hold Bill Clinton responsible. So I sort of warmed up to her, but man, people in the groups hated Hillary Clinton. And we know why, and we know where that was coming from. The other thing is that lots of people had watched this show. I mean, the extent to which Donald Trump, that The Apprentice was able to present to the world an image of Donald Trump as a carefully curated businessman, success story, tough decision maker. I mean, look, I think that firing Gilbert Gottfried from your reality television show is not a mark of, your astute business acumen. But a lot of people who don't exist in the business community thought that was like a very good representation of what a decisive businessman looked like. And so I would hear all the time people be like, I thought it was time for a businessman to be in charge. And then here's a third thing. So there's the show, there was the anti-Clinton sentiment. I think that something that's underestimated in the Republican Party today is how much the social issues of yore no longer matter. And that especially as people have picked up culturally conservative or sort of culturally MAGA, I don't want to say culturally MAGA voters from the Dems, which are sort of white working class voters who used to be unionized, who live in coal country, live in the places where I come from, that might have been Democrats before. They belong to a union. Now they are kind of culturally, they're culturally MAGA, but they're also kind of moderate on those social issues. Like they maybe go to church, but like they're not like they themselves would kind of be like, yeah, but we're not holy rollers. And they find the excessive sort of social conservatism to be constraining. They don't really like it, or they think it's weird. So he, to them, was the moderate that they had been waiting for. Like they don't think about sort of a political moderate the way, or I mean, I remember doing this early on with Log Cabin. People would be like, well, isn't Donald Trump terrible for gay people? And I was like, no, he's not actually. Like, he's terrible for lots and lots of people, but he's not particularly hostile on LGBT issues. And he like held up a gay, and I really should say LGBT, because he ended up taking the trans issue and running with it to some degree. But he wasn't socially conservative the way like a Mike Pence was. And there's lots of voters who look at a Mike Pence and think, ugh, who needs that Donald Trump was able to pick up. And so those are sort of three of my top lines of what I felt like I heard was going on that made him successful.
Right. And the very thing that would sort of like upset you or me, I like his cynicism, although of course all politicians are cynical to some degree, but where he could articulate these social conservative positions, like he could suddenly be pro-life. And it was like with a big wink of the eye, like the supporters, as you say, like, yeah, he has to say he's pro-life, but we're not going to worry that he's going to do anything about it, the way someone like Mike Pence might have done. Okay. And then among the women, I mean, over time, so the past 3 years, so the initial reaction you find is the 3 points that you make. That's why I voted for the guy. But as he remained in office, you saw what people digging in. You saw a lot of these Republican politicians who had at first been equally worried about Trump or horrified by him, suddenly falling in line, falling in lockstep. And I guess maybe the voters becoming even more dug in their support for him. What happened? What happened there?
Look, it all happened in concert. Like a bunch of things happened together. So, number one, as he becomes president, now he is president, right? So, and most voters, this is the thing. There are people who have lots of good information, but there are mostly people who either have lots of bad information or almost no information, like when it comes to voters. And like, I don't fault people for this. You know, I talk to people about the focus group sometimes, and they get really annoyed when I say, yeah, I remember I was in Ohio doing a focus group, and it was right after Donald Trump, the day after Donald Trump had gone and stood on the stage with Vladimir Putin in Helsinki and sided against America's intelligence community and sided with Putin. And this is like, Washington's on fire about it. I am on fire about it. I think this has got to end it, right? He's got to go down for this. This is going to be the end. And I walked into that focus group in Ohio and I said, what did you guys think about what happened yesterday? And everybody just looked at me. And I said, with Putin and Trump. And people were like, oh yeah. Like someone was like, oh yeah, he met with Putin. And I was like, okay, what did people think about what he said on the stage? And people just were looking at me like, give me something else. I don't know what you're talking about, you know? Right. And it was a light bulb moment for me because I knew people who had sort of been with Trump who were hanging in there with him, who walked away from him over that early on. Like it was like a crazy thing for a Republican president to do, but voters didn't care or they didn't notice. And that was true of so many of the big deal stories in Washington that we cared about. Not only were they not paying attention, but when you have something, Donald Trump knew how to just go manage a constant scandal. Like he had a constant scheduled scandal, like maintenance in this way, where what might have brought down a different president who only had a scandal or two scandals that people could really wrap their minds around, it was just white noise to people. And the other thing that happened is the political polarization that is going on at the time creates this sense of, well, the media just is unfair to him. They just attack him all the time. And people who were providing cover for Trump knew exactly what they were doing when they really went after the media, and Trump went after the media too. Because if you can discredit the people who are trying to tell you the truth about Trump, then and if people just and this is one of my biggest takeaways, is that if you throw so much information and stuff at people that they are just like, I don't know what to believe. I don't have the personal bandwidth to like suss it all out. And so I'm just going to kind of say, nah, the media lies. I don't really trust it. And what happens is there's this kind of post-truth nihilism that I see in voters where they don't really know how to approach the information. And it leaves them with a lot of open space for a lot of other sort of toxic, poisonous things to creep in. Like a lot of the Q stuff is just like, with all the crazy things going on in the world, they look at something and they're like, yeah, maybe there is this pedophile ring. Like people don't say, it's not like people say, I think the Clintons are wearing the skins of babies on their faces, which is like, I think a main tenet of Q.
Oh, that one I hadn't heard. I thought they were just running the pedophile ring. I didn't realize they were actually wearing baby skin.
So I only know this because Tim talks about the conspiracies a lot on our podcast, and so that's where I've learned it. There's actually a name for it called Frazzle Drip, which I think sounds like a Starbucks drink. But so there's this crazy, right? So there's crazy thing. But like when you listen to people talk about Q, what they say is, look, I don't believe everything that Q believes. There's a lot of crazy stuff there. Like JFK Jr. is not alive. But they're right about this pedophile ring in Hollywood and the deep state. And so anyway, the information stream has just and like, it's getting worse. I mean, before the election, I didn't hear a lot of people talk about Newsmax, or Q for that matter. Post-election, in every group, people talk about how they've stopped watching Fox News because it's too left-wing or too establishment. And then now they watch Newsmax all the time, or OANN. And it's I'm so deep into my rabbit hole of all the things that I hear that I've kind of lost the plot on your specific question, which I think was just like, why is this happening? Why did everybody kind of give over to Trump? And like the top lines are, the polarization increased, the information environment was polluted and crowded and crazy, and people can't sort of discern heads from tails. And also, because he was the president, a lot of what they caught on like the 6 o'clock news was like Trump looking presidential. It was like him sitting at a board table surrounded by generals. And they just didn't, the micro scandals that for us, we thought each one of them should be career ending, feel like barely registered.
And just a last question on that, like, and what do you hear from women specifically? Because we always thought as women that, you know, you'd see through that guy, and that's, you know, that you would be offended by his views towards women and his behavior towards women. What do you hear largely from your female focus groups, especially in the later stages?
So there's no one thing. The women are as diverse as the men generally in terms of what they believe. That being said, I would say the biggest thing that I heard, so a lot of women did move on Trump. There was a whole bunch of women that I talked to toward the end of 2020 who had voted for Donald Trump in 2016, who are not going to vote for him again in 2020. But for a lot of them, they were kind of out from the beginning. Like, they hadn't paid that much attention to the election or him prior. They had their mind made up about Hillary Clinton. They had their mind made up about him based on what they'd seen on like his reality show. And they thought, let's give him a chance. Let's give this guy a chance. And then he got started on his presidency, and they said, oh my gosh, what have I done? Like, there was sort of a sliver of women, women specifically. The
college educated women, or was it a demographic?
No, it was. So nothing is a bigger indicator for moving against Trump than a college education.
Yeah.
And for men or women. Like, it is a dividing line that transcends absolutely everything else. I think, like, if you look back at what shifted in Arizona, what shifted in, like, it is all about college education. That's where it was. People use suburbs as a stand-in, but it really is college educated voters who typically were kind of right-leaning voters or traditional Republican voters. Because Republicans kind of used to own that college educated crowd, and they've moved. There's been a swap, right? So these white working class union households who now are more culturally Republican have traded for college educated suburban voters who used to be pretty reliable Republican voters, who are now more and more becoming Democrats as the parties shift their profiles.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I realize we're coming to the end of our time, and I just wanted to now.
I'm sorry, I go on and on.
No, I am completely gripped by it. I wanted you to tell me quickly about the bulwark, or tell our listeners quickly about the bulwark. But just before you do, you mentioned the last time I saw you very recently, you were talking about how Trumpism in the party is really dependent on Trump, that the would-be Trumps, the Ted Cruzes, the Lindsey Grahams, do not enjoy the automatic support if Trump doesn't run again, that it just doesn't transfer, basically. Is that correct? Is that a fair?
100%. The Trump imitators like Josh Hawley, Ted Cruz, even like a Mike Pence, who's like dutifully stood by and nodded his head in the hopes that one day, he could be president. It doesn't transfer. Trump's charisma is all his own. I don't even think it transfers to the kids. I think there is something about both his history as a television star and as somebody who is perceived to be very, very rich of his own making, even though that is wrong. The mythology of Trump is very important to like his cult following, and nobody thinks Tom Cotton has that. Now, there are people, though, who have, I think, mastered a Trumpy posture and a performance posture that they meld together with a slightly better governing. And I would say like Ron DeSantis is right. That person where he has figured out that if you point your finger at a reporter and yell at them and you tell people that something is fake news or, false narrative, whatever, and kind of accuse people and fight, he knows that people like that. And that was a part of what people liked about Trump. But he does it in a way that is, melded with a kind of competence. He's a governor. He's a governor and has, and
play one on TV.
That's right. And he knows how to harness the grievance, right? Nothing is helping him more right now than 60 Minutes is what I thought was a pretty unfair piece. And I dislike Ron DeSantis intensely. Like I was radicalized by his ad where he had his kids, he's like reading his baby son, The Art of the Deal. And he's got his daughter and they're building the wall out of blocks. I mean, I was so repulsed by his campaign running as a mini me Trump. But I've watched him and there's no doubt he is emerging as somebody who has figured out how you kind of take some of the Trump elements and meld it with kind of some traditional Republican elements in a way that's really working for him. And you get to fight with the media and be aggrieved and in a way that like Tom Cotton, Josh Hawley, Ted Cruz, none of the rest, Marco Rubio, none of the rest of them have, none of the rest of them can do. I don't think it's something that's transferable.
That's interesting. Now, just a quick plug for the Bulwark. So having gone through this whole 4 years, Trump loses election, but you then start a new home basically for, I guess, liberal Democratic Republicans in the Bulwark.
Yeah, I mean, really, the Bulwark happened because, the Weekly Standard got shut down for not being sufficiently Trumpy.
Right.
And it was like right before Christmas. And, Bill and I were already working together. And we kind of looked at some of the people who were doing the work. Charlie Sykes had a podcast and, Jonathan Last was the managing editor there. And we thought, I don't know, let's make something. We were just in build mode. We were like, look, the only way that we are going to be able to take on Trump is if we can build some institutional power for ourselves, some local, and not just power, but like a place for us to gather both on the intellectual side and then also on the activism side. And I would think, the C4 work we did with Republican voters against Trump and Republicans for the rule of law, that was really kind of the activist part of us trying to figure out how you battle Trump from inside the party. But there was also an intellectual piece. So we launched the Bulwark with kind of an intact team. There's a reason that we were able to stand it up quickly and it became successful quickly, but it's had real staying power because if you looked at a map of media right now, especially political opinion media, it is just like running to the edges. I mean, it is just as it polarizes and pushes out and chases rage clicks and becomes increasingly crazy. It's like opened up this white space kind of in the middle for people who are center left Democrats, center right Republicans, but who view themselves as kind of politically homeless and who are just looking for truth, like somebody who's going to take off the jersey and say, here's what I think. And I think one of the things I've been most proud of about the Bulwark, especially recently, we've been having a debate about HR1 internally. Like we all disagree about it. And we publish a bunch of different things that are us disagreeing with each other about it and why. And I think that that's something that's like not happening as much in media anymore. Like even if on cable news, it's like 4 boxes of people who all agree with each other.
Or they disagree with each other in very predictable team-like ways.
Totally.
It's television depends on this. They haven't broken out of that dynamic and it's really boring to watch.
Yep. And so I don't know. I feel like we stood it up and it's found a real audience and a home and it's not showing any signs of slowing down.
Well, it's, as always, Sarah, just such a treat to talk to you. So fascinating.
And you.
Thank you. And yes, and so find you at the Bulwark and your podcasts are, you co-host the Secret Podcast and you do the Next Level podcast. How do you do this? And then you have, we didn't even get to French Village podcast. We'll have to get to that another time. But anyway, thank you for taking the time to be with us. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great.
With businesses moving many of their operations off-site and having to make tough decisions about their employees, why not consider using Bambee for your HR and save money? Because when running a business, HR issues can kill you. Wrongful termination suits, minimum wage requirements, labor regulations, and HR manager salaries aren't cheap, an average of $70,000 a year. Bambee, spelled B-A-M-B-E-E, was created specifically for small business. You can get a dedicated HR manager, craft HR policy, and maintain your compliance all for just $99 a month. With Bambee, you can change HR from your biggest liability to your biggest strength. Your dedicated HR manager is available by phone, email, or real-time chat. From onboarding to terminations, they customize your policy to fit your business and help you manage your employees day to day, all for $99 a month. Month to month, no hidden fees. You can cancel at any time. You didn't start your business because you wanted to spend time on HR compliance. Let Bambee help and get your free HR audit today. So go to Bambee.com/fem right now to schedule your free HR audit. That's Bambee.com/fem, spelled B-A-M to the BEE.com/fem. Well, I could obviously talk to Sarah Longwell forever. Just find her endlessly interesting. And I do love that all of her insights are just based on these focus groups and all the people that she meets. She's not just like a pundit spouting off, and a real woman of action. So next episode, we're going to delve into the world of sex trafficking. I have one of the preeminent authorities on sex trafficking in the United States coming on. And it's been in the news, obviously, not just with Jeffrey Epstein, but certain Republican congressmen. And I sort of want to understand what does it mean, and what does it mean in America? So we'll be talking about that next episode. So thanks and goodbye. The Femsplainers is a weekly podcast carried on the Ricochet Network and available pretty much on every podcast platform. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and watch video of our interviews on YouTube. You'll find links to everything, plus how to contact us directly at femsplainers.com. We survive and depend on your support. Like the show? Consider donating as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/femsplainers and get our exclusive monthly bonus episode, Last Call, in which you get to join the conversation with our guests. And there's much more. And a big shout out of thanks to our audio and video editor, Nat Frum.